Wednesday morning. Global oil markets. Before I tell you about the most audacious geopolitical oil grab in modern history, where a U.S. president literally announced he would personally control the sale of another nation's oil reserves, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. I bring you the most shocking geopolitical and economic stories every single week, and this one involves Trump making moves that would make 19th century colonial powers blush. Oil prices are plummeting. Not because of a supply glut, not because of decreased demand, but because the President of the United States just announced that Venezuela, a sovereign nation, will be handing over between 30 and 50 million barrels of oil directly to America, and that he, Donald Trump, will personally control where that money goes. Let that sink in for a moment. The leader of one country is announcing that he will control the oil sales and revenue of another country. This isn't a trade deal. This isn't a negotiated agreement between equal partners. This is something that has been seen on the world stage since the colonial era. One nation openly declaring control over another nation. Primary resource in its revenue. This is the story of how Trump's Venezuela strategy went from regime change to resource seizure in less than a week. How oil markets are reacting to the most brazen display of economic imperialism in decades. And why what happens next could reshape global geopolitics and energy markets for years to come. The announcement that shocked markets Tuesday evening. Trump takes to his Truth Social platform, because of course this kind of bombshell announcement happens on social media now, and posts something that would have required congressional approval, international negotiations, and months of diplomatic groundwork in any previous administration. The interim authorities in Venezuela will be turning over between 30 and 50 million barrels of high-quality, sanctioned oil to the United States of America. Trump wrote, capitalizing words for emphasis like he is announcing a casino grand opening rather than the seizure of a sovereign nation as resources. Then came the part that made economists, international law experts, and foreign policy analysts collectively lose their minds. This oil will be sold at its market price, and that money will be controlled by me as President of the United States of America to ensure it is used to benefit the people of Venezuela and the United States. Controlled by me, not controlled by the U.S. Treasury, not controlled by a congressional committee, not controlled through established international mechanisms, controlled by Donald Trump personally, as if Venezuela's oil revenue is now his personal discretionary fund. The market reaction was immediate and brutal. Crude prices, which had already been experiencing wild swings since Trump ordered the toppling of Nicolas Maduro on Saturday, sank as much as 2% Tuesday following the announcement. Wednesday morning saw another 1% drop as traders processed the implications of what had just been announced. The weekend that changed everything. To understand how we got here, you need to understand what happened over the weekend. Saturday, Trump did unjust call for regime change in Venezuela, something the U.S. has been attempting through various means for years. He went further, announcing that Washington would essentially run the country while demanding total access to Venezuela's oil reserves. Total access, not negotiated access, not purchased access. Total access to a resource that represents Venezuela's primary source of wealth and economic survival. It has the kind of language that imperial powers used in the 19th century when they carved up Africa and Asia. Not the kind of language used between sovereign nations in the 21st century. The interim authorities Trump referenced in his announcement are the opposition figures the U.S. has been supporting against Maduro's government. But here's what makes this situation unprecedented. Trump is essentially announcing that these interim authorities, who control the country, don't control the oil infrastructure, and arguably do want to have legitimacy beyond U.S. recognition, are going to hand over 30 to 50 million barrels of oil to the United States. The logistics alone make this announcement bizarre. How exactly are these interim authorities supposed to deliver oil they don't physically control? How are they supposed to extract it from fields that are operated by the current government? How are they supposed to transport it through infrastructure controlled by Maduro's supporters? Unless, of course, the plan involves something far more aggressive than has been publicly acknowledged. What 50 million barrels actually means. Let's talk about the scale of what Trump is announcing, because 30 to 50 million barrels sounds abstract until you understand what it represents. The United States consumes approximately 20 million barrels of oil per day, so 50 million barrels represents about 2.5 days of total U.S. oil consumption. It's substantial, but it's not world-changing in terms of supply. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve has held over 700 million barrels at its peak, but Venezuela's perspective is completely different. For a country whose economy has collapsed, whose oil production has plummeted from over 3 million barrels per day in the 1990s to around 800, 0 barrels per day today, losing 30 to 50 million barrels represents a massive hit to their already devastated economy. At current market prices hovering around $70 per barrel, 50 million barrels represents approximately $3.5 billion. That's real money, especially for a nation whose economy is in freefall. And Trump is announcing that he personally will control where that money goes. The analysts' reaction reveals the deeper market implications. They pointed out that the announced shipments lower the risk that Venezuela would have to cut production due to limited storage capacity. Venezuela's oil infrastructure is crumbling. Storage facilities are aging. If they can't store oil and can't sell it due to sanctions, they have to shut down production, which is incredibly costly and difficult to restart. By announcing these shipments, Trump is essentially solving a storage problem for Venezuela, while simultaneously seizing their primary export commodity. It's economic warfare dressed up as humanitarian assistance. The Colonial echoed. What makes this situation historically significant is how openly Trump is declaring something that would have been carefully disguised through diplomatic language in any previous era. When the U.S. has historically sought to control other nations' resources, it's been done through puppet governments, corporate proxies, or CIA operations that maintained plausible deniability. Trump is just announcing it on social media like he has, revealing the lineup from Mar-a-Lago's next charity event. The money will be controlled by me, as President of the United States of America, to ensure it is used to benefit the people of Venezuela and the United States. This language is remarkable for its bluntness. He's not even pretending that Venezuela will control its own oil revenue. He's announcing that he will decide how the money gets spent, ostensibly for Venezuela's benefit, but with the U.S. also benefiting. International law experts are having field days trying to figure out what legal framework could possibly justify this arrangement. But Trump is apparently operating under a different framework, one where if you can topple a government, the market reality check. While Trump's announcements make for dramatic headlines, oil market analysts are pointing out the harsh realities that make his grand plans potentially unworkable. Venezuela sits on approximately 1/5 of the world's proven oil reserves. On paper, it should be one of the wealthiest oil nations on Earth. In reality, its oil industry is a disaster. Decades of mismanagement, corruption, lack of investment, and more recently, sanctions have devastated the infrastructure needed to extract, refine, and transport oil. The oil industry observers Trump is apparently ignoring have pointed out that a quick ramp-up of Venezuelan oil production faces multiple insurmountable obstacles. The infrastructure is literally crumbling. Pipelines leak, refineries operate at a fraction of capacity, and skilled workers have fled the country by the hundreds of thousands. Current oil prices make new investment in Venezuelan production economically questionable. The country's oil is heavy crude that requires expensive refining. With prices where they are now, and with a massive capital investment required to rebuild infrastructure, it is not clear that dramatically increasing Venezuelan production makes economic sense, even if the political situation were resolved. Political uncertainty is perhaps the biggest obstacle. Even if Trump successfully installs an interim government that cooperates with U.S. resource extraction plans, there's no guarantee the government will remain stable or maintain legitimacy. Venezuela's military largely remains loyal to Maduro. The population is divided. Installing a government specifically to hand over oil to the United States, is UNDAX exactly going to build popular support? The OPEC Plus complication, adding another layer of complexity to this situation, is the timing. Trump's Venezuela power play is happening just as OPEC, the coalition of oil-producing nations led by Saudi Arabia and Russia, has agreed to boost output. The global oil market is already with OPEC Plus spent years trying to support prices by cutting production. Now they're increasing output just as Trump is threatening to flood the market with seized Venezuelan oil. The outlook, as analysts are bluntly stating, is for lower prices. Low oil prices benefit consumers, Americans filling their gas tanks will appreciate cheaper fuel. But they create a potential contradiction in Trump's Venezuela strategy. If the whole point is generating revenue that Trump will control for the benefit of Venezuela and the US, but oil prices crash because of oversupply, the actual revenue generated becomes much less significant. There's also the geopolitical angle with OPEC+. Saudi Arabia and Russia have been the primary drivers of global oil policy for years. Trump announcing that he is essentially nationalizing Venezuelan oil and flooding the market challenges their control over supply and prices. How they respond, whether by cutting their own production to stabilize prices or by increasing output to maintain market share, will significantly impact global energy markets. What happens next? The fundamental question facing markets, policymakers, and Venezuela itself is simple. How exactly does Trump plan to implement what he's announced? The scenarios range from aggressive to catastrophic. On the aggressive end, the U.S. could be planning to provide military or logistical support to interim authorities to physically seize oil facilities and begin extraction under U.S. supervision. This would essentially be an occupation focused on resource extraction. On the catastrophic end, the current announcement could be bluster designed to pressure Maduro without any realistic plan for implementation. If that's the case, oil markets will eventually realize the 30 to 50 million barrels aren't actually coming, and prices will adjust accordingly. What's clear is that Trump has fundamentally changed how international resource politics work. Whether intentionally or through his characteristic disregard for diplomatic norms, he has demonstrated that the U.S. is willing to openly declare control over another nation, as natural resources and revenue streams. If you're still watching, you need to subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. I bring you the most shocking geopolitical and economic analysis every single week. And next week, investigating how Venezuela's oil infrastructure actually works, and whether Trump's plan is even physically possible to execute. What shocks you most about this situation? That Trump announced personal control of another nation's oil revenue, that markets are treating this as normal geopolitics, or that this might actually be Drop your answer in the comments right now. And here is my question. Is this a return to 19th century colonialism or a new model of American resource politics for the 21st century? Your geopolitical insights often reveal angles experts miss. Thanks for watching. And remember, when presidents announce they'll personally control other nations' resources, we're not in normal diplomatic territory anymore. See you in the next one.